Here is your inheritance, David, said Michael, the notary, gesturing towards the large house. Is anyone living there? David asked in surprise, noticing smoke above the chimney. Yes. Let's go inside and I'll explain everything to you, and the man led the way along the cleared path. Hello, a woman of indeterminate age said melodiously. Half of her face was hidden by a black scarf. Wide clothing concealed her figure. Hello, Mary. And this is Sem's hair, David, Michael warmly introduced. Nice to meet you, Mary responded. I've set the table for you. Enjoy your meal. I'll be going. David looked around with interest. There was no luxury, but everything was in its place. Michael invited David to the table. Mary cooks very well. I recommend trying it. The ingredients are simple, but all natural. David savored the cabbage soup with delight. It seemed basic with potatoes and cabbage, but it tasted incredibly good. Michael initiated the conversation. You're probably wondering why I personally wanted to show you your inheritance. I'll explain. This small village lives by its own laws without violating existing ones. Peter is their leader. By the way, if you decide to sell the house, he'll buy it from you at an excellent price. I assure you. Mary, whom you saw, was your father's wife. According to the village customs, they never went to the registry office. I, in a way, was their assistant in legal matters. The organization of all official documents is on me. Well, that's about it. And now, please excuse me. I need to see Peter. Sort out some matters. Make yourself at home. It's now your house. David lay down on the cool sheets, subtly scented with herbs. He thought he would fall asleep immediately after the long journey, but sleep eluded him. Instead, memories flooded in. He loved his father very much. They spent a lot of time together, learning simple skills like hammering nails, sawing planks, and much more. However, everything changed when David turned 10. Maybe it was his mother's fault. He didn't understand back then. His mother was an authoritarian woman, and family life was dictated by her wishes. His father's and even his opinions were not considered. She demanded good earnings from his father, a simple factory worker. And she divorced him, screaming that he was a failure. His father didn't disappear from his son's life immediately. For a whole year, he took David on weekends, and they went to the movies, to the park, where they talked a lot. Then he vanished. David's mother mockingly told him that his father joined some cult and went to live in a village. The only thing that upset her was the alimony, which he delayed for months. David grew up, and little by little, the image of his father faded from his memory. So, the news of his father leaving him an inheritance caught him off guard. His mother chuckled somewhat sarcastically. Well, at least something. Fortunately, he still has a conscience. As they say, even from a scabby sheep, you can get something. Right after the divorce, she remarried her colleague. David suspected that she had been involved with him even during the marriage. It took David a long time to come to terms with Tom, but eventually they established a stable relationship. Finally, exhaustion took over, and he drifted into sleep. He was awakened by a knock on the door. He opened it, and there stood Mary. In her hands, she held a dish covered with a towel. I brought you a pie. Eat it while it's hot. If you want to wash up, the bath is ready, she said without raising her eyes. Thank you, the man replied, trying to see her face. But she quickly placed the dish on the table and left. David shrugged, feeling somewhat strange. Most wouldn't let someone take their home, even if it was an unofficial marriage, yet she was even providing him with food. The next morning, when David, refreshed after a good night's sleep, was washing up, there was another knock on the door. A lively 12-year-old girl rattled off quickly. Dad asks you to come over, and then dashed away. David called after her. What, Dad? But she was already out of earshot. He guessed that most likely Peter was waiting for him. Asking a passing man for directions, he reached a large, sturdy house. Well off, he thought to himself, examining the carved gates and window casings. The owner greeted him at the threshold, extended his hand, and shook it firmly. You look like him, he grumbled. Come in, David. Let's have breakfast, and then we'll talk. David got up. I understand. Well, I'll go then while I still can, he said with poorly concealed irony. If there was paradise on earth, it could only be here, lazy David thought on the third day of his stay in the village. Every day, fresh food, evening baths, skiing in the woods with skis he found in the pantry, a fairy tale. He didn't even want to leave, but he had to. What would he do here? Get married? No, he didn't have that desire yet. Besides, there weren't many girls to choose from here, in scarves up to their eyebrows in old-fashioned clothes. On the 5th day, he stopped Mary. Tell me about my father, please. How did he live in his last years? Did he remember me? She sat on the edge of a chair and finally raised her eyes to him. He internally gasped. Their blue color literally flooded everything around. Sam was a good man, Mary began. Kind, gentle. We met here at our weekly Sunday lunch. Yes, he was older than me, but his soul was young. It's a pity we couldn't be together for long, but apparently it wasn't meant to be. He told me a lot about you. He was proud of you. Don't think it's all quiet here. We have the internet, our own school. He followed your life and rejoiced in your successes. He only regretted one thing, that you never got married and didn't give him grandchildren. She seamlessly switched to informal address. David swallowed a bitter lump in his throat. To his shame, he had never once inquired about his father's life. And how will you live now? He asked Mary. She shrugged and replied gently, We have a widow's cottage. I'll live there. David asked in amazement, And you're not going to get married now? She laughed. Well, why not? If God permits, I'll get married. True, we don't have many men around, but I hope and wait for a family and children. What is destined will happen. Well, I'm going. I have a lot to do. Be healthy. David sold the house to Peter. Michael handled all the paperwork officially and offered to give him a ride. Thank you. David thanked the men. You have it so good here. I had a great rest. But now it's time to return to my familiar life. Peter shook his hand. Come back if you want. Your father was a respected man, and will be happy to see his son. When the village was almost out of sight, something made David turn around. A small figure of a woman stood on a hill. Goodbye, Mary, the man thought sadly. We won't see each other again, and I won't see your beautiful eyes again. 6 months later, during the height of summer, David approached his late father's former house. Quietly, he opened the gate and saw a beautiful young woman on the porch. Her long, flowing hair glistened in the sunlight. She sat with closed eyes, savoring the warmth. Mary? David called. The girl gasped and quickly ran into the house. He knocked on the door. 5 minutes later, she emerged. You came. Why? She asked. For you, he replied. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't forget you. Will you marry me? And he froze, awaiting her response. Of course, I agree. A familiar voice echoed from behind. Peter warmly embraced David. I knew you'd come back. You're your father's son. Now I can tell you everything. David was surprised. Is there something I don't know? They settled in a gazebo. Your father wanted you to be happy. That's why he found you a bride, Mary. He was ill and knew his time was short, so he devised this plan. I was against it, but apparently he knew what he was doing. Mary was never his wife. She is innocent. If you hadn't returned, we would have married her off. But it turned out he was right. You fell in love with each other. So advice and love to both of you. By the way, this house is now yours. It's my gift, and don't argue. Your father built it for you and your future children. That's how it goes. We don't know our fate. Today, we live one way, and tomorrow, only God knows.